list, just go visit our website. It's ycif.org. I'll hand it over to one of our board members in Toronto, to Aziz, from here onwards to lead the panel for tonight's talk. Thank you once again, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks, Seth.
Thanks a lot, Seth. All right, so welcome everyone. I'm very happy that you could join us this evening. My name is Aziz Garuba. I'll just give a quick introduction of myself, and then we'll get right into the purpose of tonight's session. So I'm currently a director of cost transformation at the Royal Bank of Canada. And I was also the past president of the Canadian Association of Urban Financial Professionals. I currently chair their corporate advisory board as well. And with me today, I've got some friends, some very good friends. And we're here to talk about and have a frank discussion around, addressing racism and systemic bias within Canadian finance. So most of our panel works actually all of our panel here works within the financial services sector here in Canada, and have great experiences and also some very good insights. And the reason we wanted to host this event or even have this discussion is, there's a lot that's been happening since the whole George Floyd situation. That has evolved from, a police brutality situation into, what has been, or what really needs to be done in order to improve the lives of Black people, and in Canada specifically, Black Canadians. So we wanted to look and talk about this, particularly as it relates to our industry on Bay Street, and get a sense of what are some things that we can do, what's happening, and what some advice that we can give to companies to in order to play their part in alleviating racial bias within Canadian finance. So to start things off, our panel today is we've got Marlon Reed, Meryl Africa, and Alan Benjamin. So I'll just start by asking each one of you to introduce yourselves. I'll just start with whoever the person closest to me on the video screen. Marlon.
Well, hello, Aziz, and thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. Really happy to be on this panel with my esteemed colleague. I've known you all for so long. And, let's just, I guess, start with what everyone's thinking. You see this beautiful camera and setup that Aziz has. And, I'm embarrassed because, I asked, do I need to get dressed up for it? Do I need to get out of my pajamas? And, had I known that I'd see this beautiful setup, my goodness, I got some stuff to think about now.
Marlon, we're all in the same boat.
So just, by way of introduction, I am a director in the Business Effectiveness Group of Commercial Banking Wealth Management at CIBC. I lead an amazing team of professionals who investigate and respond to serious allegations of misconduct. So I'm serving as the designated complaints officer for the bank. Do you want me to get into how I got here?
We'll get to that. Let's everyone just do a quick intro, and then we'll get to that piece.
There we go. I'll leave it there.
All right. Next up, Meryl.
Awesome. So thanks for the invite for attending this event. It's nice to be surrounded by all CAUFP alum on this panel. So my name is Meryl Africa. I am the current president of CAUFP. That's sort of my nighttime job. And during the day, I actually have a real day job. And so I work at a smaller FI called People's Group, where I focus on payments modernization. And so I represent our bank in this industry-wide initiative that's taking place right now and led by Payments Canada, the Bank of Canada and Ministry of Finance. So my focus is purely on policy and bylaw review as it pertains to our FI as well as the customers that we serve.
Awesome, thanks Meryl. And Alan.
Hi everyone, and thanks for the invite today. And Aziz, next time you need to send me that camera setup so I could
for sure.
So Alan Benjamin, I'm currently a managing director at BMO in our loan syndications group within our Canadian commercial banking business. At BMO as well, I also co-lead the ERG for Black professionals at the organization. So that's a nutshell.
Brilliant. So yeah, so let's start off this conversation. I'd like each of you to sort of tell us how you got to where you are in your career at this point, and along the way, could you also share if you've experienced racial bias or racism within your journey, whether it's overt or systemic, and whether this has even happened in the workplace? And we'll start with Meryl.
Okay, awesome. So my journey pretty much started about 11 years ago when I graduated from university and decided that I got tired of all the beautiful hot weather in South Africa and wanted to experience, icy cold winters. So made my way out all the way to Canada by way of Winnipeg. Started working for a fintech out west called Mobile Financial. So, worked for them in their sales team as well as in their treasury department. And that sort of got me my start in commercial banking at CIBC, where I then moved to Edmonton to work for CIBC in the commercial banking space as a cash management sales manager, managing pretty much the territory from Edmonton up to and including the Northwest Territory. So my portfolio of clients include everything from government, First Nations, oil and gas operations. So a very mixed bag that's very different to what you typically see out here in Toronto. From there, I decided that, I had enough of the country life and moved my way to Toronto to work in product management, where I worked as a payments SME, bringing that sales aspect into the role that I had. I'm launched CIBC's commercial card that they have today, and as well as manage relationships with some of our multinational partners, such as Global Payments, US Bank, and then that sort of kind of got me into the role that I have today, where the focus is really more so on how do I use that expertise of sales and product to provide insight into how the policies are going to shape the new infrastructure that we're developing for the payment system, the payment rails today, where you guys make all of your payments amongst all of the FIs domestically, as well as the fintechs. So that's sort of the long and short of it. In that journey, I've always been a diversity advocate. I used to be on the CIBC's Black Employee Network as on the steering committee. I've done things with Maniata Network, which is a network that focuses on the African diaspora, and then made my way into CAUFP, where I've been for the last 3 years. So I've always, I guess because of my background being South African, being part of the group that's come from going from segregated to non-segregated schools as we transition from apartheid to the new Republic of South Africa. I've always sort of felt that, we have to have a focus on ensuring that there's, equality, not just on Bay Street, but beyond that. And so, I've definitely experienced it. I've had clients in situations where I would go to meetings and they wouldn't respond to me or look at me. They would much rather respond to my junior associate than talk to me. I've had situations where senior folks have expected that as an associate, I would kind of run their errands and water their plants and things like that on the weekends or when they're away from, away on vacation. So a lot of micro and very overt kind of racism in a sense. And I think it was a little bit shocking for me just because you hear that, Canada is very mixed, it's multicultural, and you sort of have this great branding of what the country is, and then you come here and, it's a little bit different than what's marketed in a sense. So.
Right. Oh, that's very good insight. Alan, how about yourself?
Sure. So I was born and raised in the Caribbean. I grew up in Barbados, and I moved here. Well, I came here just about over 21 years ago to do my undergraduate degree in computer science. After finishing my undergrad, I moved back to the Caribbean, where I worked for a couple of years. I moved back to Canada in 2006 to work here full time and do my MBA part time. My first couple of years back in Canada, I worked in the pharmaceutical distribution company. Industry, in a finance and analysis type role. And then the last 12 years I've been in financial services, in finance, lending, and loan syndication roles. I'm also a CFA charter holder. As I mentioned, currently I'm at BMO, and I co-chair the Black Professionals Network. So it's Black Professionals Network at BMO, which is our ERG for Black employees in Canada, and I co-chair this with my co-chair, Joao Malumbo. I'd say for me to get where I am today, if I were to summarize it in one sentence, it would be perseverance, good advice, and one or two people give me credit for what I was bringing to the table. And the thing for me is, I felt like this as a Black immigrant here, I felt like this was the bare minimal in order for me to have gotten job interviews or information interviews for the roles I've held. To your question, have I experienced overt or systemic racism? I have. And the unfortunate thing about it is that I know too many people that have very similar stories. And the stories are very vastly, but the themes are very consistent. And you almost get to a point where you become numb to these stories because you almost always expect a Black friend, a colleague, or a family member to have experienced it. And I've been here living and working in a professional capacity for just over 14 years. There are two experiences that I would say I'm probably comfortable sharing in the setting. And that's one of the challenge in itself is you experience these things and you're not necessarily comfortable sharing it. And the issue is that unless these things are shared, then folks are unable to actually truly address and correct the behavior to correct it. So the two examples that I can think of would be one, and this is a consistent theme that I find a lot of Black professionals that I know have experienced, and this is constantly being overlooked for promotion opportunities. In this particular instance, it was always overlooked for candidates that had less experience, less education than I did. And I was never given a good reason as to why I wasn't being promoted, but I was told I was being considered. And the issue is that, you look at my performance reviews, they were all very good. I would get comments like exceeding expectations, ready for the next level, but yet promotion never occurred, not because the opportunities were not there in this particular instance. So this particular example, I got to a point where I finally said enough is enough, and I communicated internally that I would be applying for roles outside of the area after being bypassed for yet another promotion. The response that I got when I indicated that I found was interesting. The response was, this is not the right time for me to make a move because there's a unique opportunity right now for me to mentor the individual that was promoted past me in that senior role. So imagine me now going for my next job interview and I'm relaying to the interviewer my experiences and I'm saying, well, hey, I was the junior staff, but I was mentoring the senior person. Like this would be classified as nothing more than extreme embellishment on my part. Like who would believe me, right? The other experience I can think of is once I was referred for a role internally and I was interviewing with the senior HR partner for this particular department that I was interested in. And the interview, I had what I thought, and so this interviewer was someone that would interview candidates for a recruitment pipeline for this particular department. And I thought I had what I thought was a great interview, but at the end of the interview, I was told by the interviewer in a manner to deter me from considering or applying for roles in the area that you can keep looking for opportunities in our business, but to apply to, but please note that the candidates that we consider typically have either a computer science degree, an engineering degree, or would have had an MBA, or are CFA charter holders. Now, I don't know if you remember what I said in my intro about my profile. So imagine how I felt when I had to remind the interviewer that the reason why I was referred to the role, the reason why I was interested in that department was one, because I have a computer science degree, I have an MBA from Schulich, and I'm also a CFA charter holder. And the issue here is that this individual was the gatekeeper for this group, right?
Wow, that's profound, man. That's really, really profound. And this is indicative of a lot, as you mentioned, there are a lot of experiences that Black professionals have in the industry or at work or anywhere. And we get to a point where it's sort of been normalized. And we almost have, Teflon coating now. It's like, yeah, that happened and we move on.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you said, it's important that during this period, we feel comfortable enough to share some of these things because that I think is the only way where change can happen.
And this is a unique time to do it because we're in a time now where corporations are actually willing to listen and act.
Right. Marlon, how about you?
Sure. So my professional career got started with a commerce undergrad. and a law degree. And so my journey to where I am today is quite circuitous. I got my first shot on Bay Street working for a corporate trust business in structured finance. I stayed there for a little while before moving on to the investment banking arm of TD Bank, TD Securities, where I continued work in structured finance and doing work predominantly with the asset securitization group, and then going on later to do structured products and work in the energy space, global energy markets, negotiating deals for physically delivered natural gas and as well as storage agreements. Between my time at TD and CIBC, I did get an opportunity to try to raise a fintech startup. I did that for about 14 months before my wife told me to get back to work, and found myself at CIBC. It's important to note, well, along the way that I picked up a Master of Finance from Rotman during my time at TD. I also got very much involved with the diversity agenda there. So I took on a leadership role, sitting as co-chair of the Black Community Subcommittee and sitting on the Diversity Leadership Council. And it was during that period where I started to reflect on my career and where I wanted to go in my ambitions. Everything before that was just to make a name for myself and be successful within the dealer in the investment banking space. But spending time working on trying to get more Black people into roles of leadership made me realize that I needed to get broader experience and exposure. That's what I was hearing from my mentors across the bank, that I needed to go leave the dealer and get exposure in other business units. I had some challenges in making that transition for a number of reasons. My seniority, for instance, making lateral moves into other SBUs is not an easy thing to do at that level. You're probably going to be asked to give up a level, possibly two, maybe some compensation. So there's some challenges that I had there, but it made me realize that there's much more in store for me. And then I started to focus my career really on leadership. And so I needed to find that opportunity. So arriving at CIBC, it was really about pivoting. So going from investment banking, capital markets, credit management into wealth now gives me that extra a bit of breadth in my experience and exposure to make me a more transferable and transformational leader. And I hope to continue to kind of build my exposure across other SBUs as I continue my career. Now, on the question of my experience of systemic or overt racism, the stories I think I can share that were most profound, I think, in my career, were really just about access and that feeling of belonging. So I mentioned coming out of law school, most people are going to trying to get into the large Bay Street law firms. I had aspirations to get into one of the Seven Sisters, as they call them. And part of the interview process at the law firms were your typical one-on-one or one-on-two office interviews, but they also had cocktail parties, which is an extension of those interviews. You don't really understand that until you're there, that you're also being evaluated in the cocktail parties. And I was an abysmal failure at those cocktail parties. Handled myself with no problem during the interviews, one-on-one, one-on-two. But the cocktail parties, I found that I just couldn't stand out, at least not in the way that I wanted to. Couldn't get into the conversations, much of which were about travel, about the cottage, about golf, about hockey, things that I really had no exposure to. Until that point, I hadn't traveled anywhere. You know, hockey was not something that I had access to at home. Golf I hadn't played, and cottage, like, forget about it. So I found myself outside of those conversations. So I couldn't engage the partners that were having and leading those small little conversations. I couldn't engage those partners. I couldn't even engage my colleagues, other folks that were also interviewing. So it made me feel like I just didn't belong. It wasn't a space for me. So complete failure. Now, fast forward a year later, I get a shot to work at this corporate trust business, structured finance. And I'm feeling good because I've arrived. I'm working on my first deal, and I'm getting set to go to close my first deal in the boardroom of one of these same law firms that I interviewed a year prior.
Oh, wow.
At this closing, I was joined by my manager, who was there to support me. This tall, elderly, older white man. And when I got to the boardroom, there was clearly no one else in that room that looked like me. I was proud of being there. I was proud of the fact that I arrived. I saw a few faces with whom I interviewed a year prior. And at the end, what's typical with these closings is a simple bought deal for special warrants, syndicated deal. What's typical is the CEO of the company and the lead underwriter will go around and shake the hands of all the people that worked on the deal after they signed the papers. So here I was standing and watching as the CEO and the lead underwriter approach each person shaking hands. The CEO arrived at my boss first, shook his hand, came to me, and gave me this warm two-handed shake, looked in my eyes and said, "Thank you." It made me feel really good. And then the lead underwriter did the same thing, shook my boss's hand, and then looked at my outstretched hand, and then looked at my face, and he pat me on the head and said, "Attaboy." And I didn't know what to feel in that moment. It was just, I just knew something was really off, and I could see every single eyes on that little interaction, everyone. My boss standing right next to me, seeing that. Everyone in that room saw what happened. And I feel like people knew there was something wrong with that. But what was I gonna do? What was I gonna say? I let that moment pass, and I'm thinking about the walk back to the office with my boss. It didn't come up, he didn't raise it, didn't talk. Matter of fact, he was tripping over himself to cheer me up because he knew that I was feeling off. Usually what happens when I have these experiences, I go back and talk to my family. I go talk to my friends. You know what happened to me today? I lived with the shame of that moment for years. I'm actually just starting to share that story. I never shared it with anyone. Why? Because here I was out of law school, armed with 2 wonderful degrees, armed with all of the tools that I need to speak up for myself, to say something for myself. And the opportunity came and it passed. So I felt like I belonged for a minute, and then I didn't. And I realized that I just had no power. It didn't matter how much education I had. I had no power. I didn't know how to deal with these people. And it was shameful because I didn't want anyone to know that I was a coward in that moment. That's why I felt that. But now I'm sharing it. We talk about sharing. I'm hoping that is of value to people.
Yeah, Marlon, and thank you very much for doing that. It takes a lot of courage to be able to really just be that open and be that vulnerable, with something that's deeply personal. And you know, it's again indicative of a lot of frustrations that people, a lot of Black people feel. You know, it's called suffering in silence. And a lot of times we feel that, you know, something goes, you know, something negative happens to us at work that we know is wrong, but we overlook it because, you know, we say, okay, we need to feel, you know, we need to be grateful for the fact that we're just even there. And then we look at, you know, maybe sometimes the rest of our families or the rest of the community that would kill for that kind of role or that kind of position. And then that pushes us into not speaking up or not challenging the status quo. I guess as we move forward in this discussion, how do you guys feel that the impact of things like this has had on the Black community, particularly when it comes to finance? And you can touch on any area, you know, in terms of wealth disparity, financial literacy, the ability for the Black community to make investments. What are your thoughts on how systemic racism has really impacted the Black community in the finance context? Anyone?
Maybe I'll start. So from my perspective, systemic racism has limited the progress of many Black professionals. We have a few people that have made it, that have done quite well. But the issue is that you still have the vast majority of individuals stuck at lower level, mid-level positions, and they have the foundation, whether it's education and baseline experience to excel, but just never been given these opportunities. And the issue that I found is, you know, we get more educated and then we jump around and do a number of lateral opportunities or focus on a number of lateral opportunities because you're constantly told you need to round out your experience to advance. But you never advance, right? And this systemic behavior, you know, limits the ability of a Black professional to truly compete and earn at the exact same pace as your peers, right? And the reality is that if you're unable to share in that economic growth, then it filters through to your community, your household, your kids, your family. Like it just filters through, right? And that's a problem. And you have these systemic things that are in place today, and you know, like we need to find ways to and it goes with everything, right? From investments to whatever. It doesn't matter. Like it just exists and it just trickles down, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's almost like death by a thousand cuts. So if you think about it, you know, starting from the high school level, right? And we've seen those articles about, you know, how they're changing sort of the curriculum now because we find that a lot of, even though there's young talent with the grades, with the aptitude, they're being steered away from going to university if they hope to do so. And so already if you're a Black person coming from a family who may be refugees or immigrants or low income, you already don't have sort of that almost example and knowing what you want to do. You kind of know you want to be on Bay Street. So you go to your guidance counselor and you're already told, you know, death by a thousand cuts. You can't make it, go and be a social worker. That's already at the beginning, you're kind of being deterred. Then when you go in and you get the education, when you're being recruited, there's an issue there because if you don't have, and I know from a lot of, especially international students, they don't do, for example, a lot of, you know, joining clubs and that type of thing because they're focused in the summers and in their off time to make money to pay their way through school because a lot of times they don't have a co-signer for a student loan. So already there, you're not even getting into capital markets. You're not even getting likely even into commercial banking or any of these little stages, associate programs where you're starting at a great level for your career, right? So you end up working in a call center, as a teller in the bank, in, you know, some other back office function. So it's already a steeper mountain to climb. Then even if you get into those associate programs, you're working your way up, there's the issue of compensation. A lot of Black people and other racialized groups are not paid on par with their white peers. You're then, you know, put at that glass ceiling again because you're told, you know, be well-rounded or wait your turn or whatever, you know, excuses given at that point. And then even if you make it to the executive level, you have all this pressure on you because Black people are looking at you as like this beacon of hope, like, okay, you're gonna break the ceiling, and people don't think about you're the only one up there. and you still have a family to feed. You have a career that needs to still survive after this. So you're also limited in your capacity for how much that you can do. So it's sort of just so many levels of how the system affects all of us. And then that doesn't even talk, that's just on the career side. That isn't even going to talking into, you know, the lack of funding on entrepreneurship. The fact that if you look at, for example, commercial banking and wealth management, we don't have folks on the sales side who can help to invest in businesses, who can help to articulate the business value to the risk team who adjudicates that application for a loan. Like there's so many levels in which, you know, the system kind of works against you. And I think that's the problem. That's why it's so much harder to get ahead at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah, very good points.
Well, I would agree. I think it's sometimes, I think it can be very confounding to building generational wealth. But I think it's even deeper than that. I think it's thinking about the fundamental participation in finance. I think when you think about monopoly, for instance, you know, I think at one point in my life I thought I was the best Monopoly player, and I ran into a friend of mine that I played with, and everything sort of changed my view and perspective. I used to be happy and content just going around the board and collecting my $200 until I got to a point where I was comfortable to now start to buy properties. Where my friend, what he did, every property he landed on, he spent the money. He went and just bought that property. Wasn't ever worried about the risk associated with the liquidity or lack thereof, but he bought the property. And you know, he'd run out of cash at some point. But after a little while, he realized he just bought most of the board, and that he was going to start to collect when people started landing on him. So I think it's something that is pervasive in our community. When we think about the bias that we've experienced, it affects us, our psyche in so many ways. Think about the iron laws of finance, you know, time value of money, the risk value of money, and the tax value of money. Well, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you'll never understand the value that money today has. You'll never understand what that is. If you are, if you don't want to take any risks, you'll never understand what risk-taking activities can actually do for your wealth. And so I think the fact that we get put into this position where we're not even participating, we may have all the financial literacy, we may know everything we need to know about all these things, but if we don't feel comfortable taking risks, well, we'll never actually do the things and behave in the ways that we need to behave. Right. Excuse me, to behave to get to that next level.
Yeah, and you brought up something very, very critical. You know, a lot of, you know, this systemic stuff has made people, as I mentioned earlier, suffer in silence, but also the emotional tax associated with things, that loss of confidence or not being able to have the vocabulary. And someone brought this up in the comments. I believe Carla just brought this up. You know, just not having that vocabulary or the practice or support to be able to just address things that are not right within an interaction. And this affects your confidence, which then leads to maybe performance issues, which then, of course, leads to being capped at a certain level because you're not exuding that confidence that, you know, our other non-Black counterparts are able to do.
I don't think it's necessarily a confidence issue. I think there needs to be a reframing of understanding that with Black people and just any racialized group, right? We come from different cultural backgrounds, and Toronto is probably one of the most diverse cities out there. And so if the expectation is that this is what our perception of confidence is, if you look at, you know, Black culture, regardless of whether you're African, Caribbean, when you look at some Asian cultures, for example, you know, culture's not taught to sort of talk back at elders or people in positions of power. And so for us, the way that we may address certain things are seen as, well, it's kind of you're meek, but it's more we're taught, how do you negotiate with someone, even though you're submissive, it's still a position of strength. And I think there needs to be a reframing at that executive level of these people leaders to understand that there's not one version of what confidence and leadership looks like, right?
Yeah, very true. Very true. And so I'll just, we're getting a couple of questions in the chat. So I'll just ask one of those and then we'll move on to some of our other questions. And one question comes from Amy Afiene. And so she asks, do you think that the section in job applications where you're asked to identify that you're a visible minority, Black, affects our chances of getting hired? Or should you select the prefer not to answer option? This is a debate that a lot of us, have. Does it do us a disservice by declaring our ethnicity when we're applying for jobs, or does it put us at an advantage? What are your thoughts on that?
So my perspective is, I think you should disclose it, right? My view is the sooner you find out that organization is going to discriminate against you, then the better it is for you to not. So if you're going to be not selected or deselected as a result of that, then that's not a bad thing, because you don't want to work with that organization. That's my perspective on it. And I do think so. And again, so I also have a slightly different perspective because I co-chair the ERG at the bank. I think getting folks to identify and actually align the organization, because the issue is that a lot of these organizations don't track the data, right? And because they don't track the data, because they say legislation doesn't require them to track the data, they don't track the data as to the makeup of their workforce. So everyone gets clumped into visible minority or whatever category that you have for it, but you actually don't segment in between there. But once you're able to, so my view is that being able to come together and collect that data as a collective to say, well, this is your, for example, your Black population, then the larger you are, the bigger your voice is. So the organization then has no choice but to listen to you. My perspective on it, I know a lot of people, they don't want to do it because you don't want to be, you don't want to be rejected as a result of it. And there are other individuals where, you don't want to necessarily be promoted as let's say, or identify as a token Black individual. My perspective is, I have the experience, I have the education, I deserve that job, right? And if anyone were to come in to me and say, well, hey, you only got that because you were, they needed to put a Black person. No, I got that role because of all of these quantitative reasons, qualitative reasons. I deserve that job, right?
Right.
That's my perspective on it. I do know people have different perspectives on that particular point.
Sure. Awesome. Thanks, Alan. And we'll just ask another question from the audience here. And two people have asked a similar question. So, and maybe Meryl, you could probably touch on this. And as all of us here are, have come from different countries at some point, and immigrated to Canada, and went through the education system and through the workforce. So a couple of people are asking about, being a Black international immigrant coming into Canada with vast loads of educational and career experience, but then you struggle to get into roles that match your technical and leadership experience from the country that you came from. We know this affects a lot of newcomers to Canada, but I think there's probably a disproportionate negative impact for Black immigrants. What are your thoughts in terms of steps and practical measures that we can, folks should take to position themselves? And what support do you think organizations, companies, the banks, financial institutions should give to Black individuals and people of color that fit this demographic?
Sure. I mean, the first thing folks have to remember is you're in the most competitive city in Toronto, in Canada, right? So even if you were a Canadian, it's already competitive to begin with. So I always say that because I want people to have that reminder of it's not going to be a walk in the park right from jump. Now, one of the things for me, my start was in Winnipeg before I moved to Edmonton, before I moved here. But one of the things, so it was even more difficult because there were not as many newcomer kind of career fairs that you're seeing a lot these days. There was not, organizations like TRIAC or Access to help me. I had to kind of figure it out myself. I didn't go to school in Canada. I went to school in South Africa. And so for me, what I did was I was very targeted. So the first step was to get a job, which was working in sales in a call center for fintech. But what I did with that was I networked and I got my next job within the company working in the treasury and accounting department, right? And then from there, that actually is because of utilizing those products, that's what got me the job that I have today. Well, not today, but what got me the job at CIBC in commercial banking, right? Because I could speak from the client perspective of utilizing the treasury products. And then even when I went for that interview, I was interviewing for a position in Winnipeg. I always say to people, if you don't have kids, make it known that you would be willing to work in another city. I think being open to that, that's what I literally said it as a joke in my interview. And the woman called me up and she said, hey, I hired somebody, but I really liked you. You were super confident. You showed up with no suit jacket. You were like with this quirky, confident little 4'11" lady. And I feel like you can sell to people. And she was like, would you move to Edmonton? I was like, when do I start? She's like, you know what I think about? I was like, when do I start? And what are you paying me? And so because of that, I was able to then internally transfer to Toronto and get the job that I have today where, I'm sitting at the table with anyone from, director up to SVP level at these conversations, talking about how we're shaping the way that you're going to move money, right? And so what I always say to people is don't be so fussed on, what position you can get in. We're all hoping and trying to get those great jobs, but if you can, once you get in the door, be strategic, be tactical about what the next move is. Give yourself a personal timeline of 2 to 3 years to transfer to another department. Do the networking. The networking is so important because I feel like in our culture, we're not, I'm South African, we're not really taught to network as much. And so you have to put yourself out there. You have to let it be known you're interested in things, and do that and be targeted. I also will say is, don't be afraid. There's always that joke of, men will apply for any job and women were very scared and laid back. For me, because my mother couldn't go to medical school because of the color of her skin, I was always taught it doesn't matter, just get in the door. And that's why every job I've applied for, I'm pretty sure that job at CIBC, the lady probably knew I was not qualified for it, but she was like, you know what, you're confident and you could probably sell, so I'm gonna give you that opportunity. And so I always say, just take that risk, sell yourself, sell your strengths, and that should hopefully get you, but it's not gonna be an easy journey. It's gonna be a long one, and it's gonna be a hard one, and you have to remember that.
Awesome.
Just I want to second what Meryl is saying. So coming from the Caribbean, I was raised, it's head down, work hard, everything else will happen. Go to school, get educated, head down, work hard, everything else will happen. Coming to North America, it doesn't work that way, right? You absolutely need the bare minimum, the educational requirements, but there are a bunch of other soft skills, networking stuff that would be important here. As someone coming here that's an immigrant or immigrant that's Black, it becomes a little bit harder because those biases that will exist will limit you. But that being said, you cannot come and not expand your network. You cannot come and not get out of your comfort zone. So whether it is industry organizations, volunteer organizations, wherever you can go, so people you can communicate and broadcast to people the skill sets that you have. That's what you absolutely need. You absolutely need to do. I know individuals that have come here and they've taken on all types of jobs just to try to get that. When I first moved here, back to Canada, my first job, I did it for 3 months. This job is not on my resume, so I'm not sharing. It took me, for this role, it took me an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes to go in one direction to go there. I had to take a bus, a TTC, a GO, and then 2 Brampton Transit buses. So 4 in order to get to this job. And I did it for 3 months, but I only did it because that's the job I got the experience. And unfortunately, sometimes you just have to make those sacrifices in order to get there. Again, it's not easy, but you just gotta step out of your comfort zone and network as much as you can. And then hopefully it will work out.
Great. So Marlon, I'll ask you this next question, and we've seen a lot of the wave of hopeful change that's sweeping the world in the wake of George Floyd's death, with regards to systemic racism, police brutality, and there's what someone might consider a global reckoning when it comes to anti-Black racism and change. in Canada, we've seen a lot of companies that have, they've come out with their statements of solidarity, commitments to do better. Lots of money is now seems to be, has suddenly appeared and is flowing into initiatives that focus on the Black community. Why do you think this is, things are different in this case? And what do you think that beyond what the solidarity and things that companies have already put out, do you think there's more that companies and organizations or even the government should be doing in terms of commitment to addressing systemic racism within the Black community?
Well, I would say that the coalescence of the pandemic and social unrest has, I think it's been had the biggest impact. If we're asking about what's different, everyone will say, well, they've been home, they've been isolating, you have nothing else to do other than work and watching what's on, what they're talking about on the news. And when you're seeing these images over and over again, you're not getting desensitized to them. You're getting disgusted. You're now starting to ask yourself, is this, I don't feel right seeing these things. But I think something else, I think there's another layer in all of this, and this is the pandemic side, that people have taken time to reflect on their own humanity, the vulnerabilities of who we are as people. People have taken that time and realized that there changes like this need to be made in the world. The great thing about all of this, and we're talking about the momentum that's happened, is that we have things like social media. People are lifting up their voices and sharing how they feel about these things. So much so that they're now aware of their own individual influence in the voices that they have, in the dollars that they spend, and who they share these things with, to the point that we've gotten to this tipping point. George Floyd was that tipping point. It was enough is enough. And you're right, it's a reckoning of sorts, but the reckoning is not in, telling, telling everyone, here's what we need to do and here's what you have to do. The reckoning is with being silent, in being complicit. People have to look within themselves and say, I don't feel good about myself for allowing these things and saying nothing. And that's really what's changed.
Right.
I can't comment on the government side on what should happen. I can't comment on anything prescriptive in that regard, but I can talk about what I expect from government action here and after. And it's real simple. You just think about the government's role in financial services. There's usually three focuses that a government would have is one, protecting the investors, fostering confidence in the markets, and creating stability. My guess is if there's any government action that's taken, it'll be toward one or more of those things. It'll be about how do we instill confidence in that, in how large financial institutions who, especially in Toronto, is a very big employer, how do we ensure that they're all doing the right things? And so if there's any action the government will take, it'll be along those lines. And I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Yeah. So, and yeah, I think even, and Alan brought this up earlier in terms of collecting appropriate data, which, for federally regulated financial institutions, there isn't any obligation to collect race-based data. And we've seen the negative impact of that, particularly during this COVID-19 situation where, hospitals and healthcare, the healthcare industry that hasn't been collecting race-based data was caught unaware, or I guess caught flat-footed in terms of the disproportionate negative impact that the pandemic had on the Black community. So, I guess my suggestion would be that, an area where the government could help is, just make it mandatory for federal institutions to have and disaggregate the diversity data, so that, it's clear, right? You either are, are doing well or you're not, as opposed to most organizations that find ways to make their diversity statement or their diversity position look as glamorous as possible. So we'll just take, let me see if there's any other questions in here that have come through. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, just put them in the Q&A. We'll try and get to as many as possible during this session. So I'm just going to ask each of you, what are you currently doing personally to sort of help address racial bias within your own workspaces, and whether this is directly in your team or on a larger scale in the organization? What are you guys working on that's contributing to at least shifting the dial on this?
So I will say for myself, I'm at a much smaller institution. There's probably about a handful of us that are Black, and we're pretty much spread between Toronto and Vancouver because we're a Vancouver-based company. So there's not a lot in terms of ERGs or anything that exists. So everything is pretty much centered at everyone. But I think with having somebody like myself working for the institution, and them seeing a lot of the things that most of you probably see on my LinkedIn that I'm involved in and the conversations that we're all having, it's giving them more of an awareness of the needs of racialized people, specifically Blacks, and thinking about even in, the products that they deliver, that consumer base, how are they going to be marketing, targeting, and addressing, social issues around that.
Well, and I think you're also doing pretty well in terms of using, being part of CAUFP. And I mean, for those that don't know, Meryl has been on BNN, CBC, a bunch of news media over the last month and a bit, promoting and pushing for effective change within Canada when it comes to systemic racism and championing.
Yeah, my title on LinkedIn is gonna say banker by day, social justice warrior by night.
Yeah. Awesome. Alan, any thoughts in terms of what you're
so for me, so as I mentioned earlier, so I co-lead the ERG for Black employees at the bank. So I co-lead it with my colleague Joel Malumbo. So we were the ones that would have initiated the start of this ERG, which is October will be 2 years in Canada at the bank. And we're working internally within the organization to get some concrete programs and actions put in place to help with addressing racial bias. What we're proposing could be viewed as having a focus on a couple things: removing barriers to career advancement, addressing how and where the institution recruits, how the organization and then how the organization can sustainably support the Black communities and customers on an ongoing basis. And then the other thing we're hoping to focus on with the organization is bias training within the organization. So those are the things that, on a broad scale, that the institution is looking at.
Cool. Marlon?
Well, first and foremost, I'm sending everyone any link where Meryl is speaking. Make sure that everyone knows that she is speaking. Meryl has something to say. You better listen. So, that's where my part. That's what I like to do. I'm also sharing more. I'm having I would say more open and honest conversation. I'm putting aside my own ego and pride to let people know about the hurt that I feel. You know, something simple like the fact that I'm struggling right now, wondering whether I'm still a credible role model to people because, you know, if I can't convince my own kids that the education that I managed to get for myself gets me anywhere that would interest them, then I wonder, you know, if I'm effective, if I'm ever going to be effective. I'm struggling with that. So I'm sharing more of myself on that front. With folks within CIBC, I mean, I sit on the CIBC Black Employee Network, so a lot of conversation happening there. We've been engaged in listening exercises where everyone was able to share those experiences with senior executives across the bank. And CIBC is responding in a very big way. We're all excited about the engagement and traction that we've seen there. I'm also trying my best to get people to see what their real influence is. You know, looking deeply into the things that they could be doing and saying to actually help move the needle. You'll be surprised that not everyone is aware of the influence they have, and so I try to think a little bit deeply on those things, and I share, or I'll even ask questions. Of course, I'm busy in so many ways in the community. You know, I sit on the 100 Strong Foundation board. I've been staying close to the Black North Initiative and also to the Black Opportunity Fund, a few very big and important initiatives that are coming out for our community. So, so I'm doing that, and there's probably so much more I could do. I just have to remind myself that I have a day job.
Don't we all?
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So for myself, you know, I've been a champion of everything Black for a long time now, and I just returned to RBC just yesterday, and I'm going to resume a lot of my advocacy for the Black employees within RBC as well. I think prior to me leaving RBC the first time, you know, we had started an initiative working on Project Beacon, which has gotten a significant traction within the bank over the last 2.5 years in terms of representing Black professionals at RBC. So looking forward to getting back to doing that type of work. I'll be leading a webinar with some HR folks, hiring managers, and HR executives at RBC at the end of this month to discuss some actionable and tangible steps that they can take towards creating and sustaining a talent pipeline for Black professionals as well. And of course, continuing work with CAUFP and supporting Meryl in her newfound.
You guys don't know how much work Aziz does in the background. So it's not a one-man show. There is so many people on the board that do a million things. So
yeah. and for, you know, for those wondering about this great glorious looking setup that you see here through the camera. So I also, one of the things I also do is I run a podcast called Made to Lead, which focuses on storytelling, positive storytelling of Black individuals that are across all the spectrums from, you know, entry level to all the way to executives that are leading in their various spaces. And the reason I do that is because, you know, a lot of the times the narratives that we don't tell enough of our own narratives. So that's just my contribution to that space.
Aziz, congrats on the move back to RBC. I had a chat with one of your colleagues about a week and a half ago to they're reaching out to ERGs across the banks to continue your Beacon project.
Yes.
And then the announcement from RBC and the media yesterday on what they're doing, the intentional action plan.
Yeah.
That's something that I expect all other financial institutions to take note of and either follow suit or improve on.
Cool. I think there are a few RBC folks on the call that will probably take that back as well.
Well, Aziz, I can't tell you congratulations. I'm sorry I cannot. Because what I expected was you to come to the right team.
No,
both you and Meryl and Alan. Bill.
Well, you gotta be sending the office, Marlon. When we see the number, we'll talk.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll just go through a few questions that have come through just before we wrap up. So let's see here. So there is actually there are a couple of questions from Marlon. You know, a lot of folks resonated with your story of the Attaboy story. You know, and one statement here says that, you know, Marlon, you know, you need to be able to forgive yourself and release all of that shame, because that behavior was not your fault and not your responsibility. Those in the room that participated and were complicit in not saying anything, those were the ones that are at fault in this situation. And another person asks, you know, what would you recommend for someone, you know, to take as an action when they encounter a situation like that, particularly to a junior employee, whether it's, you know, either as a subject or as a witness in that situation?
So, you know, as I reflect back on that time, you know, I would, if I were to see this play out in any other way, what I would hope is that, you know, my boss, my manager, who was in the room right next to me, I would have loved for him to speak up on my behalf. It doesn't take that much time to make an assessment that you know, regardless of my skin color, I may not feel comfortable speaking up or raising my voice to someone that's senior. Maybe I just need a champion in that room for me. He was there to support me. Well, he could support me in that way as well. So, you know, for allies out there, for anyone in that position, I think it's important to sort of think about all the things that kind of play out in a scenario like that. And if you can come to the rescue of someone to just speak up or help them speak up or empower them to speak up, then I think that's what I like to see going forward.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. And one other question that we have. So we've got a question from Yasmin, and she's asking, you know, now that she's asking a question on behalf of young professionals just starting their career. And she asks, now that we got in and have gained, you know, that you've gotten in and gained experience in a first entry job, how can a young person transition into the next role that better aligns with a career choice where experience is highly sought out, especially as a Black individual?
Can I answer that? You know,
Yeah, sure.
because I am a young professional, most qualified. No, I mentor a lot of people, and this is a question I get all the time. And my conversations always start with the same thing, and it's not what you know, it's not even who you know, it's who knows you. And you'll find that the work that you put into building your brand will actually help you along your path. People that actually know who you are and what you're about, you thinking about what you want people to know about you is critical. And so you can start to help shape the way people see you by thinking about the things that you value in yourself that you'd like other people to see. So I would say it should start with the who knows you question. It'll help aim your trajectory and your target better if you're able to think through how you want to show up in the world.
Awesome.
The only other thing I would add to what Marlon's, and I agree with what Marlon's saying, it's really who knows you. I think people should start earlier in your career. So I know, like within the banking institution, if you're you typically have to stay in a role anywhere from 2 to 3 years, depending on your level of seniority. And the challenge that a lot of folks wait until they get to that 2-year mark or 3-year mark to start to look. I think it's important to actually start to have a lot of informational interviews from day one. So, you know, your first month in, again, you're not looking for a job, but just explore, reach out to folks for coffees just to understand, hey, I'm just curious to understand what your department does, what you do on a day-to-day, just so I know what you're looking for in the future. And because you're not asking for a job, people will likely be a little bit more inclined to have that conversation with you. And what that does is that it helps you build up an arsenal as to what you need to do in order to position yourself for that role. And again, it doesn't have to be that you're talking about the next role. It could be 2, 3, 4 roles down. You're having an information interview to understand that. And all of that builds into what you do with respect to building your profile. So going back to Marlon, if you know these are the skill sets that they look for, the question then is how can you volunteer, put your hand up, or do other things to be able to get that skill sets, and how can you do it in a manner that the folks that are going to make those decisions can actually see.
Awesome. All right, we've got a question from Linda, and she asks, as an ally and a TRIAC mentor, if you could give me 2 pieces of advice to help my foreign trained mentees who have immigrated from Africa, what would they be? And I'll answer this, Linda. One, the first thing, of course, is to make sure that all of their, they figure out a way to translate all of their foreign experience into language that can be recognized or that translates into Canadian experience. I would also advise that they reach out to actually CAUFP or YCIF. These are great organizations that, particularly if they've got finance experience or that's where they're looking to get into. These 2 organizations are well plugged in into the industry and can provide specific mentorship to those folks. We do have a lot of new immigrants, people that have lots of good experience from African countries, from the Caribbean, that are members of both groups and can provide some kind of guidance to help as well.
Yeah, I would also add to that is ensuring that you can find ways to help them get to where they want to get by alternate means, right? So a popular role is everybody, especially if they worked in the UK, they probably worked in capital markets. They want to come here and work in capital markets. And we have a former board member, for example, who's from Barbados, and he talks about how he kind of made his way into capital markets, but it was a little bit of a segue. So understanding, you know, what other options are out there for them that may be an alternate route. Also understanding that they don't only have to work for the big 5 banks. There's a lot of companies that are big, great companies to work for in Toronto that are not just the big 5 banks. So really just kind of educating them on some other great employers as well.
Yeah, that's very good. So the final question I'll ask just as we wrap up, you know, we've shared a lot today. We've talked about how we feel. We've talked about some of the issues, but I think it also makes sense to also think about, you know, solutions and you know, advice that we can give. And so the last question I'll ask is, what words of advice would you give to our audience, particularly the you know, non-Black individuals, in terms of what they can do to help change the narrative, to help address racial bias in their own environments, or to support their fellow Black employees and the Black community?
Well, first off, you can join CAUFP if you want to learn more about the Black experiences on Bay Street. We have diverse programming. You don't have to be a finances person either. So just putting that out there. I would also say, and I jokingly say that, but it's true, and it doesn't have to be CAUFP. It can be many other organizations for all racialized groups. I think that's a great way for you to learn and understand what people are experiencing. We had a great event last year where we did an event with Asians Without Borders, right? And we kind of had that intersectionality conversation of, as Asians and Black people, how are we different but the same? And it was really eye-opening to everyone. So I think that's a great way to educate yourself outside of, you know, Google and getting books. And then to Marlon's point earlier, if you see some situations like that happen, you know, standing up and being a true ally, advocating for somebody, even if you're not the senior person in the room, is, you know, just really, you know, standing up for injustices, even if you're in a room with just white people as well, and things are being said that are not kosher. I think that's something that we need people to be more vocal about, more out there. And that's, yeah, I'm sure Alan and Marlon probably have some other great tidbits to add for that as well.
I think you just stole all of mine. So just the only thing I'd add to what Marla said is, I would also tell people just to take a deep reflection, an honest inward look at what part you may play with any type of racial bias or stereotype. whether conscious or unconscious, and try to correct those behavior, and just again use whatever privilege you may have to help your control in any negative things that are occurring around you. And if you're an ally, then I think you just need to let people know that you're an ally. And if you're not, then you should just become an ally.
And I would add, just thinking about leaders in this industry, one of the qualities that we all know as being possibly the most important quality in leadership is self-awareness. Understand and realize that self-awareness, part of self-awareness is understanding the privilege that you may have had toward your own success. I think sometimes it requires that in that self-reflection, in that self-awareness, that people think about the privilege they have. If they don't, there'll be an assumption made that they got there on their own merit, and that anyone else trying to do the same should do it the way you did, and maybe that's not possible. So I would say I would start with the leaders to think about self-awareness and adding that little piece in. I'd also say to take some risks. We're talking about the Black community being more comfortable with risk and understanding the value of risk. Well, maybe we should do the same. We should be thinking about the risks that may exist in not having of having foreign education, whatever that may be, whatever you may feel about that. Well, let's take some risks. Let's see what happens. And think about, be comfortable also with failure. I think this is all a journey. We're not going to get this thing done overnight. This is going to take some work. We can expect that in some ways we're going to fail, but please do not give up on this community. I'm begging you, please do not give up on this community. And then finally, I would just say, for everyone listening, I'm a past president of CAUFP, right? And I have to tell you that much of my own development, the skills that I developed to become a leader, and especially a people leader and a strategic leader, I developed in CAUFP in my role as president. This is, for me, was game changing in so many ways. So when I arrived and got opportunities, I was able to put all the things that I learned to work. And I want people, I want folks that are considering joining CAUFP, think about what you could actually build and develop for yourself. And I also want people that are out there hiring folks from this community, think about the skill set that they develop, those people develop and build in an organization like this. Don't expect them or require them to get experiences in a job, in a paid role. Value the experiences, the skills that are being developed and built in this space. I think you'll find that you get so much more out of the people, out of the talent that's out there. So value that experience and that exposure as well.
So
Wonderful.
It seems to be a consistent theme. The panelists are all past CAUFP. Well, you guys are presidents and a board member.
Yeah, that's true. It's a great organization.
Elections are coming up, Alan.
Yeah.
Elections are coming up. if the Black and White Network's not keeping you busy enough.
Just saying.
Like, who needs sleep, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Marlon, Meryl, and Alan, for being very candid, for being very open, being very vulnerable and transparent in your experiences, and sharing a lot of the lessons that you've learned along the way. I think the one thing that we can take away, that everyone can take away and try and do is, you know, we all have to have a spirit of understanding. Everyone's journey, everyone's situation, everyone's experience is different, regardless of the ethnicity that you come from. But we all need to have that spirit of understanding in order to be able to relate to the challenges that someone else is experiencing. So right now, the focus is on the Black community. Tomorrow, it might be on a different community. And we as Black people will have to also understand and come from a place of understanding. So that's what I would leave everyone with. You know, take away everything that you've learned from here and go back to your workplaces, to your homes, and seek understanding and put it into practice as well. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming out and joining us this evening on behalf of the Young Canadians in Finance, as well as the Canadian Association of Urban Financial Professionals. I want to say thanks to Marlon, Meryl, and Alan for being here as well. And look out for more virtual events by YCIF. You guys will are probably now on the mailing list. So you'll get some updates as to the next virtual events that are coming up. And just keep a close eye on that, and keep a close eye on the website. Similar to CAUFP as well, check out their website for upcoming events. For those of you that want to see Meryl again in her media blitz, she's going to be speaking at another event at the end of July, on July 22nd. It's another collaborative event with Women in Capital Markets. It's called Black on Bay, and it's a great panel conversation that's got some heavy-hitting folks, including Meryl as well. Meryl's going to be moderating a great tight panel. So check out the Women in Capital Markets website or the CAUFP website for more details. All right, that is it from me. Thanks once again. Thanks, Safe and Mash for helping us with the